The waitress sat in his booth to escape her manager, not knowing he was the mafia boss. The air in the walk-in freezer was thick enough to chew. It tasted like raw oysters and industrial bleach. Mac Dillard blocked the door, his bulk filling the stainless steel frame, a halo of condensation already forming on his shoulders. His Bayou Bite manager's polo was strained across his stomach, smelling of stale coffee and the day's humidity, a permanent funk that clung to him. "I'm not asking—" "Harper," he said, his voice a low growl that didn't match the forced, damp smile. "We're slammed. You're staying till close." Close meant 3 a.m. My shift had officially ended at 11 p.m. "Mac, I already worked 10 hours," I said, my own voice sounding thin in the cold. "That's unpaid overtime. Again, I can't—" "Can't?" He took a step closer, crowding me back against the wire shelves of shrimp. The overhead fluorescent light hummed, a single, agonizing note. "You're living in that shoebox apartment above the laundromat on Decatur. You need this job a hell of a lot more than I need you, sweetheart." My name is Harper Vale, and I hated the way he said sweetheart. It felt like a threat wrapped in cheap, damp lace. My hands were numb, shoved deep into the pockets of my thin apron, fingers clenched. He was close enough now that I could see the sweat beading on his forehead, even in the 34-degree air. He leaned in, lowering his voice, a grotesque pantomime of intimacy. "Just be cooperative. Maybe I can find a little extra in the register for you, a 20 for your trouble." That was it, the line, the one he always pushed, and the one I always danced away from. Tonight, the ice in my veins from the freezer gave me a spine. I didn't argue. I didn't speak. I dodged sideways, ducking under his arm that had been braced on the shelf. I shoved the heel of my hand against the heavy door's release bar. The seal hissed open, and I spilled out of the cold, metallic silence and into the humid, loud chaos of the kitchen. The floor was slick, always slick, a patina of fryer grease, spilled gumbo and dishwater that no amount of mopping could ever truly defeat. I caught my balance on a stainless steel prep counter, ignoring the line cook who yelled something about a ticket for table 6. My breath was ragged, fogging in the sudden kitchen heat. Mac was right behind me, his voice a bellow that cut through the clatter of plates. "Harper, don't you walk away from me, you're suspended." I didn't run. Running gets you fired, and suspended was just a word he used to scare me. I moved through the swinging double doors into the main dining room. The sudden, lazy moan of a saxophone hit me like a physical wall. The Bayou Bite was technically a 24-hour diner, but this was New Orleans, so jazz bled from the speakers constantly, thick and heavy as the air. I just needed a second, a place to breathe, a place to disappear before he made a scene in front of the late-night tourists. My eyes scanned the room. Desperate. Mac's voice was closer, right behind the door. Booth 4. It was dark, tucked in the back corner by the wide windows that overlooked the Mississippi. The glass was always fogged by the river's breath, blurring the lights of the cargo ships gliding past. It was the booth everyone knew you did not touch, the one reserved for Mr. D, a ghost I'd never seen in my 6 months working here. It was always empty, yet always held, a small shrine of formica and cracked red vinyl. Tonight, it wasn't empty. I didn't care. I slid into the vinyl seat, my back to the room, head down, praying the deep shadows would swallow me whole. I just needed Mac to walk past, to assume I'd fled to the locker room or out the front door. The vinyl was warm. Someone was already here. I froze, my heart seizing. I slowly, agonizingly looked up. He wasn't Mr. D, or at least not the paunchy old man I'd pictured. He was something else entirely. The man sitting across from me wore a linen suit the color of cigar smoke. It looked thin, impossibly expensive, and utterly out of place among the chipped tables and sticky condiment caddies. He wasn't looking at me. He was stirring a tiny cup of espresso, his movements slow, economical and deliberate. On his left pinky, a black signet ring, heavy and onyx, caught the dim neon light from the jukebox, absorbing it. He didn't need to look at me to own the space. His presence was a physical weight, pressing the air out of the booth, silencing the ambient diner noise. A few tables over, two men who looked like they ate bodybuilders for breakfast were staring intently at their phones, but they weren't scrolling. They were listening. They were with him. I had crashed the wrong party, a very, very wrong party. I started to slide back out, my apron catching on the edge of the table. "Sorry," I whispered, my voice trembling. I didn't realize. I'll go." "Harper." Mac's voice cut through the saxophone like a dull knife. He was here. He stomped over, his face purple with rage, his eyes bugging. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Get out of that booth. Now you're harassing the customers." He reached for my arm, his thick fingers spread to grab. Before his skin could graze my sleeve, the man in the suit moved. It wasn't fast. It was inevitable. He picked up the tall, laminated menu from the metal holder on the table. He didn't look at Mac. He simply opened the menu, a full-color spread of beignets and alligator po' boys, and held it up. It became a perfect flimsy shield between my face and my manager. Then, slowly, he rested his other arm along the back of the red vinyl booth, his hand hovering just behind my shoulders. His fingers didn't touch me, not by an inch, but the claim was absolute, mine. Mac froze. His hand hovered stupidly in the air between us. "Sir, I apologize. This employee is being disruptive. She's fired. I'll have her removed." The man said nothing. He just kept holding the menu, his face obscured by a picture of crawfish etouffee. He turned his head, just slightly, toward the bar. He raised one dark eyebrow over the top of the menu. That was all it took. Frankie, the bartender, who never rushed for anyone, practically fell over himself reaching for the volume knob. The lazy, mournful jazz vanished. It was replaced by a sudden, blaring blast of brassy, upbeat swing, loud enough to rattle the glasses on the shelves and make the tourists at the counter jump. The entire diner's atmosphere pivoted on that one gesture. The spotlight that had been on me and Mac suddenly swung, isolating Mac in a pool of awkward blaring sound. The power hadn't just shifted, it had been surgically transferred. The man lowered the menu. He finally looked at me. His eyes were dark, not angry, just deep, like the river at night, reflecting no light. He signaled Frankie, not with a wave, but with a simple, deliberate lift of his chin. "Two," he said. His voice was a low baritone, calm, coated in Louisiana molasses, but with an edge that cut right through the music. It didn't ask for permission, and a hot chocolate for the lady. He looked back at Mac, who was still standing there, his authority bleeding out onto the greasy floor. "She's safe here." It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact, as simple as an order for coffee. Mac tried to laugh. It came out as a high-pitched squeak. "Right, sure. My mistake, sir. Enjoy." He turned, but before he could take 2 steps toward the safety of the kitchen, 2 men in pressed blue uniforms building security, not diner staff, were flanking him. I hadn't even seen them enter. They must have been waiting by the door. "Mr. Dillard, we need a word with you. In the back." "About what?" Mac blustered, his color draining. "About the walk-in freezer door, sir. We had a complaint about the emergency latch. Someone had made a call. Fast. My mind scrambled, trying to connect the dots. This wasn't just a regular with pull. This was a network, invisible and instant." Mac looked pale as he was politely, but firmly, escorted toward the back exit, the one that led to the alley. The diner settled back into its new rhythm. Only now, the rhythm was his. The swing music was still loud, insistent, and cheerful. Frankie arrived with a tray, an espresso for the man, and a heavy, steaming mug of hot chocolate, piled high with whipped cream, for me. I stared at it. Thank you." "Drink?" he said. He wasn't looking at me again. He was pressing a finger to a discreet black earpiece. He leaned forward slightly, murmuring something too low for me to hear over the trumpet solo. "The asset is secure. Handle the disposal." As he leaned, the collar of his expensive linen jacket shifted. On the back of his neck, just below his hairline, was a tattoo. It was small, just black ink, but intricate and sharp, a fleur-de-lis, the symbol of the city. But this one was stark, stylized, and felt less like art and more like a brand. It was unsettling. I sipped the hot chocolate. It was rich, made with real chocolate, and it burned my throat, chasing away the walk-in freezer's bone-deep chill. My hands were shaking so hard I had to grip the mug with both of them. He finished his espresso in one short, dark swallow. He stood, the linen suit falling perfectly back into place, unwrinkled. He placed a few bills on the table, far too many for 2 drinks. His bodyguards were already at the door, holding it open, scanning the street. He paused, looking down at me. That intense, river-dark gaze held me captive. "Ronan Delacroix," he said, introducing himself as an afterthought, as if the name should have preceded him. He slid something across the table. A business card. It was matte black, made of heavy cardstock, with no name, no logo, only a 10-digit phone number, embossed in clean, simple lettering. He placed a small, folded cocktail napkin on top of it, holding it down. He left. Just like that, the oppressive weight in the booth vanished, and the air rushed back in, leaving me alone in the sudden, echoing quiet. I unfolded the napkin. A message was scrawled on it in strong, black ink, the handwriting swift and angular. "When the manager touches you again, call." I stared at the black card. My heart was hammering a frantic, broken beat against my ribs, a rhythm that had nothing to do with the jazz. I felt 2 things, sharp and contradictory, swirling in my stomach with the hot chocolate, relief and a terrifying, profound fear. My shift wasn't over. I still had 1 hour left, but I knew, deep in my bones, that my life as Harper Vale, the quiet waitress just trying to get by, had just ended the moment I slid into his booth. The black card felt heavy in my apron pocket, a 10-gram slice of midnight pressing against my hip. I finished the last hour of my shift in a daze, mechanically wiping down the counters, the scent of bleach and stale beer doing nothing to clear my head. Frankie the bartender avoided my gaze. The building security guards were gone. Mac was gone. It was as if a giant, invisible hand had swept the board clean, leaving only me and the echo of that brassy swing music. I clocked out at midnight, clutching the few dollars in tips I'd earned. The diner wasn't my only hustle. It wasn't even the one that mattered. By 10 the next morning, I was on Frenchman Street, the sticky, humid air already thick with the smell of sugar from the praline shops and the faint, sweet rot of the river. This was my real office. I had my folding stool, my easel, and my box of charcoals around my neck, heavy and familiar, hung my grandfather's old film camera, a Minolta SRT, built like a small, reliable tank. My sketchbook was already half full of the city's bones, the intricate iron lace of balconies in the quarter, the way the ancient oak roots buckled the sidewalks uptown, the damp, shadowed corners where the gas lamps still flickered. I sketched tourists for $20 a pop, capturing their vacation smiles while my eye was really cataloging the architecture behind them. I was finishing a portrait of a giggling couple from Ohio, my fingers smudged black with charcoal, when my phone buzzed in my back pocket. It was a cheap prepaid, the only kind I could afford. I ignored it until I'd handed over the sketch and pocketed my money. I flipped it open. An unknown number. The message was short, anonymous, and punched the air straight from my lungs. "Don't come in tomorrow." Below it was an attachment. I clicked it, and my screen filled with a screenshot. It was the back end of the Bayou Bites new delivery app. Bayou to you. I recognized the interface, but this wasn't an order for gumbo. It was a list of transactions, dozens of them, all for identical, oddly specific amounts. $123.45, again and again, each one marked catering adjustment and paid out to a holding company I'd never heard of. This wasn't just skimming the register. This was a washing machine, running a full spin cycle right through the delivery app. My blood went cold, colder than the walk-in. I thought back to last night, to the week before, the weird tickets, the receipts I was supposed to throw out, not file. One in particular flashed in my mind, a catering order from 2 nights ago, at the bottom, where a customer might write a tip. Someone had scribbled a strange notation in blue ink CTIA flag. It meant nothing to me then. Now, it felt like a siren. I'd Googled CTIA on the diner's slow computer during a break. Curious. The only hit that seemed plausible was a dry, corporate-looking site for something called the Coastal Trade Integrity Agency. It looked like a dozen other boring, semi-public port authorities, full of mission statements and stock photos of cargo ships. The diner was being watched, and Mac, stupid, greedy Mac, was either the architect or the pawn. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Mac. My stomach twisted. It wasn't a text. It was a video file. I pressed play, my hand shaking so hard the screen blurred. It was security footage, grainy and time-stamped from last week. The angle was from above the server station. It showed me grabbing my stack of tip receipts, and as I turned, it showed me dropping one. It showed me picking it up, along with a $20 bill that had been sitting on the counter from the previous server's cash out. The angle was perfect. It looked, for all the world, like I was palming the 20. A clean, undeniable theft. A text followed immediately. A misunderstanding, I'm sure. But the new owners won't see it that way. Be at the kitchen's back door. 7 a.m. You're making a delivery for me. We'll call it even. He hadn't been fired. He'd just been handled, put back in his cage by Ronan Delacroix, only to find a new way to bite me. Ronan hadn't saved me. He just made me a more valuable hostage. I sat on my stool on Frenchman Street, the sound of a nearby trombone fading to a dull buzz. I was trapped. If I went to the cops with the money laundering screenshot, Mac would drop the video. A broke waitress with a theft charge versus a manager with new, powerful owners, I wouldn't stand a chance. I'd be in a cell before lunch. My fingers fumbled in my pocket, closing around the hard, sharp edges of the black card. When the manager touches you again, call. This was touching. This was a vice grip. I packed up my easel, my hands on autopilot. I walked fast, away from the music, ducking into a narrow, jasmine-choked alley. I pulled out the card and my phone. I stared at the 10 digits. This was a bad idea. This was leaping from the greasy frying pan into a fire I couldn't even see. But Mac's video was a gun to my head. I dialed. It rang once, a click, no greeting. Yes, a voice said. It was female, cold as brushed steel, with no accent I could place. My name is Harper Vale, I stammered. I was given this number last night, at the Bayou Bite. Silence. Then. What was the name of the man who escorted your manager? My mind raced. They hadn't given a name. I don't know. They were building security. They talked about the freezer latch. What was on the table when he left? The card, bills, and a napkin. The message? My voice was a whisper. When the manager touches you again, call. Another pause. This one so long, I thought she'd hung up. Your situation is noted. Miss Vale, do not expect contact. Do what your manager asks. You will be observed. The line went dead. You will be observed. It didn't feel like a promise of help. It felt like a threat. The next morning was gray. The sky a flat, damp sheet of concrete. 6:55 a.m. I was at the diner's back alley, my old sedan idling, the engine knocking. The air stank of spoiled milk and the river. Mac shoved a large styrofoam cooler out the door. It was heavy, taped shut with silver duct tape. Take this to the Pont St. Jude docks. Pier 12. A guy will be waiting for it. What is it, Mac? I grunted, hefting it into my passenger seat. It sloshed. Oysters, special order. He smirked, his confidence back. Just drop it and go. And Harper, don't be a hero. You're just the delivery girl. As I pulled the cooler across the seat, my fingers brushed a sticker on the lid. It wasn't a shipping label. It was a black and white square, complex and digital, a QR code. I recognized it from the tech blogs I read. It was a link, probably to a crypto wallet. This wasn't oysters. This was a payout. The drive to the docks was 10 miles of dread. My Minolta was on the floor mat, tucked in its worn leather bag. I always had it with me. It felt like the only part of myself that was still clean. The Pont St. Jude docks weren't for tourists. This was the industrial gut of the river, a sprawling graveyard of rust and shipping containers. Pier 12 was deserted, just a long wooden jetty stretching into the brown, churning water. A single dark green airboat was tied at the end. A man was leaning against a piling, whittling a piece of driftwood. He looked up as I pulled to a stop, the gravel crunching under my tires. He wasn't big, but he was wired tight like a bundle of snakes. He wore waders and a sleeveless shirt, revealing arms covered in faded, intricate tattoos of cypress roots. His eyes were the color of swamp water, a pale, sickly green. His smile didn't touch them. It was a smile that sucked the heat from the morning air. "Right on time," he said, his voice a reedy drawl. "Got the package." "It's here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where do you want it?" "Just leave it. I'll get it. You can go." This was Silas Creed. I didn't know his name, not yet, but I knew his type. He was the boss of this particular patch of mud. He was the reason Mac was sweating, and the reason I was here. I got back in my car, but I didn't start the engine. My heart was hammering. This was the moment. This was the link. My hand went to the camera bag. "You will be observed. By whom? Ronan's people? Or Mac's? Or this guy's?" Silas picked up the cooler and carried it toward the airboat. Just then, a black sedan, impossibly clean, glided to a stop at the head of the pier. It hadn't made a sound. Two men got out. One was one of the bodyguards from the diner. The other was Ronan Delacroix. He was dressed down today. No linen suit, just black trousers and a dark, button-down shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows. He looked more dangerous, more real, in the flat gray light. Silas Creed stopped. His cold smile widened. "Delacroix," slumming it. "Silas?" Ronan nodded, his voice calm, carrying easily on the damp air. "Just checking on my investments." Silas gestured with the cooler. "This ain't your investment. This is red cypress business." Ronan ignored him. He was looking at the sedan. The bodyguard opened the back door, and a man in a rumpled suit stepped out, carrying a sleek, silver briefcase. My hands were moving before my brain caught up. I lifted the Minolta, resting it on the window frame, angling it through the dirty glass of my passenger window. The telephoto lens was old, manual. I twisted the focus ring. Click. Shutter. Wind. Ronan and Silas stood face to face. The bodyguard stepped back. The man with the briefcase handed it to Silas. Silas, in turn, handed the cooler to the man in the rumpled suit. A clean trade. Click. Wind. Silas opened the briefcase. It was full of cash. He snapped it shut. Ronan hadn't moved. He was watching Silas, his expression unreadable. Click. Wind. I zoomed in, tight on Ronan's face. He was listening, nodding at something Silas was saying, his face a mask of polite business. Then, as Silas turned to walk toward his airboat, Ronan's head lifted. His eyes. He looked directly at my car, directly at the small, dark circle of the lens. He looked right at me. Click. My heart stopped. He hadn't scanned the area. He hadn't glanced around. He had looked, with pinpoint accuracy, at the exact spot where I was hidden, 50 yards away, behind tinted glass. And he had seen me. He knew. He had to have known I was here. Do what your manager asks. You will be observed. I dropped the camera into my lap as if it were on fire. My hands were slick with sweat. Ronan turned, got back into his sedan, and the car pulled away. As silent as it had arrived, Silas Creed laughed, started the engine of his airboat, and roared off into the bayou, leaving me alone on the pier. the smell of diesel and low tide stinging my nose. I drove home in a fugue state, the black card on the seat beside me feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I locked the 3 deadbolts on my apartment door. I didn't have a dark room. I had a bathroom with no windows. I mixed the chemicals in a plastic tub, my hands shaking so badly I spilled developer on the warped linoleum. I hung the negatives from the shower curtain rod with clothespins. I sat in the dark, in the chemical stink, for what felt like hours. Finally, I turned on the single bare bulb. The images were grainy, stark black and white. There was Silas, his swamp green eyes rendered as pale, dead circles. There was the exchange, the briefcase, the cooler. And there was the last frame, the close-up. Ronan Delacroix. The focus was sharp. I could see the stubble on his jaw. I could see the impossible calm in his expression. And I could see his left hand, resting on his hip. He was wearing the black signet ring, the same fleur-de-lis, dark and heavy. But that's not what made me drop the print into the bathtub. It was his eyes. In the photograph, frozen in silver halide, they were looking right at me, not with anger, not with surprise, with something that looked horrifyingly like approval, as if I'd just passed a test I never knew I was taking. The call came 2 days after the incident at the docks. 2 days I spent jumping at every creek in my apartment building, my Minolta camera hidden under a loose floorboard with the negatives. The voice was the same cold, sterile woman from before. She didn't say hello. Mr. Delacroix requires your presence. An address has been sent to your device. The address wasn't a sleek downtown office. It was deep in Bywater, where the Mississippi makes its sharpest bend, a neighborhood of colorful, sinking Creole cottages and massive, slumbering warehouses. The one I stood in front of was corrugated tin, painted a faded, defiant purple with no name on the door. The air smelled of damp wood, welding metal, and the river. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open, and the squeal of the hinges echoed in a cavernous space. It wasn't a warehouse, not anymore. It was a studio. The ceiling was 3 stories high, crisscrossed with steel beams where light from massive industrial skylights cut through the gloom. The walls were raw brick, but they were covered, gallery style, with enormous canvases of local art, haunting, vibrant paintings of second-line parades, bayou landscapes, and portraits that seemed to stare back with unsettling wisdom. Ronan Delacroix was standing in the center of the room, in front of a long, modern glass table. He was in his shirt sleeves again, the black signet ring the darkest thing in the room, save for the shadows in the corners. And on the glass table, laid out in a precise, neat row, were my photographs. My grainy, black and white 8x10s, Silas, the briefcase, the cooler, and him, his face, staring right at me. My blood ran cold. He hadn't just known I was there. He'd retrieved the evidence. I looked toward my bathroom, my cheap lock, my hidden floorboard, and felt impossibly naive, a child who thought hiding her eyes made her invisible. "They're good," he said. His voice was quiet, but it filled the massive space. "The composition is desperate, urgent, and you have the gaze of a survivor, and—" He tapped the final photo, the close-up of his own face. "The hunted." I found my voice. It came out dry, brittle. "How did you get these?" "Your apartment has 3 locks. The bottom one has a weak pin. You should fix that." He dismissed the how with a wave of his hand. "You're a sketch artist on Frenchman Street. You work nights at a diner being used as a wash house. You use a 30-year-old camera. You're better than all of it." He gestured to the photos. "What do you see here?" "Harper." I see a transaction," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "I see you, with Silas Creed, the red cypress outfit. You see what you were meant to see." He picked up the photo of the exchange. "I am not in business with Silas Creed. I despise the man. He deals in synthetic poison and human misery. What you photographed was not a deal. It was a feint. A necessary piece of theater for a much larger war. The war for this port." I wanted to believe him. The relief that washed over me was so sudden, so total, that it made me suspicious. Theater, it looked real. The money looked real. It was my money, delivered to a man who works for me, who was posing as a courier for Silas. The cooler seized inventory from one of Mac's idiotic back alley deals, made to look like Silas's product. We just painted Creed's logo on it. Silas thinks he intercepted a rival's payout. He's proud, he's sloppy. Ronan looked at me, his eyes intense. And you are now the independent witness who captured him making a deal with a man he's not supposed to be associated with. The photo is the bait. My head was spinning. Bait for who? For the Coastal Trade Integrity Agency. The name landed like a stone. CTIA flag, I whispered. I saw it on a receipt at the diner. Exactly. They've been watching the Bayou bite for months. They think Mac Dillard is the big fish. He's not. He's chum. Ronan laced his fingers, resting them on the glass. They are a problem. They are sniffing around my businesses, my properties. This photo. He tapped his own image. This is for them. It confirms their suspicions, draws them in, makes them focus on Silas, not me. I swallowed, my throat dry, my art, my camera, my refuge. All of it was just a tool for him, a piece on his board. I pointed to his hand, to the ring. The fleur-de-lis. I saw it on your neck at the diner. I saw it on the man in the photo. What is it? He paused, a flicker of something. Not pride, but weight, passing over his features. It is the mark of La Société Signe Noire, the Black Swan Society, my family. A crime family. I said, it wasn't a question. New Orleans has always had, societies, he corrected gently, networks of influence that operate outside the lines drawn by politicians. We have codes, rules that matter. Rules? I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Like using waitresses as bait, like threatening them with faked videos of theft. His gaze hardened. Just a fraction. Mac did that, not me. And our primary rule, the one that is never, ever broken, is that we do not harm innocent women or children, ever. Silas Creed does not follow that rule. That is why he must be removed. I don't trust your rules, I said, the words sharp and sudden. They sound convenient. They sound like they protect you. You don't have to trust them. He stepped closer. The glass table no longer between us. The smell of wet wood from the beams overhead mingled with something clean and expensive, like ironed cotton. You just have to live. And right now, you are standing in the middle of a war you cannot win. You have Mac on one side, Silas on the other, and the CTIA watching you both. You are a liability to them all, and liabilities get erased. He stopped, close enough that I could see the faint trace of a scar on his jawline. I'm offering you a fourth option. What option? Protection. Real protection, not a phone number and a hope, a position. He gestured to the art on the walls. I own a club in the quarter, Ledoux Phantom. It's a jazz club, an institution. I am offering you a post as the club's resident artist. You will have a studio. You will be paid a salary, triple what you make sketching tourists and slinging hash. You will document the music, the performers, the life of the club. You will be under my roof, my brand, my protection. You will be untouchable. He was turning me into one of his businesses, an asset, something to be sheltered and curated, like the art on his walls. I hated it, and I was desperate enough to consider it. I'll do it, I said, temporarily. He nodded, as if he expected this. But I want something in return. I pushed, my pulse hammering. Mac, I want him gone, out of my life, for good. He can be removed, Ronan said, his voice flat. No, I said, shaking my head. Not like that. No violence. I don't want him hurt. I thought of the freezer, the damp smile, the threat. I just want a clean exit. I want to be free of him, without blood on it. Your move, your rules, whatever. Just get him out of my world, cleanly. Ronan looked at me, a long, searching appraisal. Then a slow smile touched the corner of his mouth. It didn't reach his eyes, but it was there. Understood. His eyes, however, turned sober. It's the right move, because Mac isn't your only problem. The CTIA. They have a file on you. Harper, they've had it since you started working at the diner. They know about your old foster care records. They know about the trespassing charge from 2 years ago when you were caught sleeping in a vacant building. It's thin, but it's enough. They're not protecting you. They're cultivating you. They're waiting for you to get desperate enough to be their informant. You're bait for them, too. My stomach dropped. I was a pawn for everyone. Before I could process this, his phone chimed, a soft, single electronic note. He pulled it from his pocket, his gaze sweeping the screen. His expression remained neutral, but the energy in the room shifted, tightening. Silas, he said, holding the phone up. It was a text, a digital invitation. There is a charity gala. Tomorrow night, aboard the Belle Riviere riverboat. The whole city will be there. And so will he. He pocketed the phone and looked at me. The chess match was over. The next move was on the board. You're coming with me, he said. It wasn't an invitation. The gala is honoring local artists. You will be attending as part of my new art team. Go home. Someone will be by in the morning with what you need. The Belle Riviere was not a boat. It was a floating palace of wrought iron and glittering gaslight, churning slowly up the dark Mississippi. It was a 3-tiered cake of old-world glamour, dripping with electric lights that cast a golden sheen on the muddy water. The air was thick with night-blooming jasmine and the brassy, joyful noise of a live swing band. A box had arrived at my apartment that morning. Inside, nestled in black tissue paper, was a dress the color of deep moss, made of silk that felt like water. There were shoes, delicate heels I could barely walk in, and a small, vintage beaded clutch. There was no note. Now. I stood by the grand staircase as Ronan Delacroix adjusted his tie. He was back in a suit, a perfectly tailored dark charcoal wool that made him look less like a gangster and more like a founder. His tie pin was a small, sharp fleur-de-lis, this time in silver, catching the light. He turned to me. He didn't say I looked beautiful. He didn't smile. He just held out his hand. They're playing Sing, 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 he said, his voice a low rumble beneath the blast of the trumpets. It's fast. Can you keep up? I waited tables. I can move. I said, A flicker of that smile touched his lips. This isn't a diner. Harper. He led me onto the polished wooden dance floor. The band was in full flight, a frantic, ecstatic explosion of drums and brass. He put one hand on my back, the other took mine, and he pulled me into the rhythm. He wasn't lying. It was fast. He led with an effortless, coiled strength, spinning me out and pulling me back in. His feet a precise, rapid counter-rhythm to the drums. I was clumsy at first, my new heels skidding, but my body remembered the movement from my shift, the quick pivots, the spins to avoid a collision. I stopped fighting the music and let him lead. He spun me close, his mouth near my ear, his breath warm. He wasn't even breathing hard. Look to your left, the bar, the men drinking Sazeracs. I glanced as he spun me. 3 men in cheap suits laughing too loudly, their eyes scanning the crowd. Who are they? Red Cypress, Silas's scouts. They're not looking at the art. They're watching the staff. He dipped me, a dramatic, showy move that made me gasp and pulled me back up. The trumpet section hit a screaming crescendo. This boat is his new route, Ronan murmured, his voice masked by the music. He's not using the docks. He's using the generator. What? The Belle Riviere is a true paddle steamer. The engine room is massive. The generators that power these lights have hollow compartments. He's moving synthetic bricks, 24 at a time, right under the noses of the city's elite. Clean, efficient, and hidden by the party. I tried to process this. My feet moving on autopilot, my mind racing, a moving drop point hidden inside the engine of the party itself. Our goal, he spun me again, our bodies brushing, is to get him to his product. We need a location, a timestamp. We need to know which generator housing he's using. It was then I saw it. Over his shoulder, Mounted on the wall near the engine room access door was a large, decorative brass fan. It was intricate, stylized, a piece of Art Deco kitsch, but the pattern cut into the blades, a series of squares and lines meant to look like a river map, was identical. "Ronan," I said, my voice tight, "the fan on the wall." He guided me in a slow circle, his eyes never leaving mine, but I knew he was looking. "The pattern," I said, my heart hammering. "It's the QR code, the one from the cooler." His grip on my waist tightened. "Just for a second, it's a map," he breathed, "a schematic, hidden in plain sight." The song ended with a final, crashing cymbal. We were both breathing hard, though I suspected only one of us was from the exertion. The applause was polite, scattered. Ronan led me off the floor, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back, a gesture of possession that felt both terrifying and safe. "Get me a seltzer," he said, his voice all business again. "No lime. And wait for me on the aft deck. I need to speak to the captain." I nodded, feeling like an operative, a role I had never asked for. I slipped through the crowd, the silk of the dress whispering around my legs. I felt like a fraud, a charcoal smudge sketch artist dropped into an oil painting. At the bar, I waited for Frankie, the bartender's equivalent, to notice me. A woman slid up next to me, ordering a gin and tonic. She was sharp, angular, in a severe black pantsuit. Her blonde hair pulled into a tight, unforgiving bun. She looked utterly out of place, her eyes cold and analytical, scanning the glittering crowd with open disdain. She turned to me, and her smile was as artificial as the electric candles. "Harper Vale, you clean up nicely." I froze. "Do I know you?" "Keely Frost." She held out a hand, her grip firm, her nails short and practical. "Coastal Trade Integrity Agency. We spoke on the phone." My blood turned to ice. This wasn't the cold, anonymous woman from the phone. This voice was sharp, present, and dangerous. This was the agency Ronan said was cultivating me. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, turning back to the bar. "Don't," she said, her voice dropping, losing its fake cheer. "I've been watching you since you stepped on this boat. You're swimming in a very, very deep tank, Miss Vale, and you're allied with the biggest shark in it." The bartender handed me my seltzer. My hand was shaking. "He's using you," Keely said, leaning closer. "Ronan Delacroix, the society, that ring, it's all poison. They're the old world rot in this city, and Silas Creed is just the new world infection." "He saved me," I said, my voice low, "from Mac." Keely laughed, a short, dry bark. "He didn't save you. He acquired you. He bought the diner 3 days ago. Mac works for him now, just in a different, less public capacity. You're just an asset. Harper, a tool." The seltzer in my hand felt impossibly heavy. He owned the diner. He'd bought it. My clean exit for Mac wasn't a favor. It was a corporate restructuring. The lie was so smooth, so total. It stole my breath. "He's going down," Keely said, her eyes pinning me, "and everyone he's touching is going down with him, unless they decide to help themselves." She slipped a business card into the pocket of my clutch, her fingers quick and practiced. "Don't trust the man with the fleur-de-lis ring. When he's done using you as bait, he'll cut the line. Call me. We're the only real-life raft you've got." She turned and vanished into the crowd, leaving me shaking, the card burning a hole in my bag. I walked out onto the aft deck. The air was cooler here, the massive red paddle wheel churning the river below, a rhythmic, hypnotic thump, thump, thump. The city glittered on the shore. "That's a lovely dress. Almost makes you look like you belong here." The reedy, swamp water voice made my skin crawl. Silas Creed was leaning against the railing, a champagne flute in his hand, his cypress root tattoos stark against his white tuxedo shirt. His pale green eyes drank me in. "I was just admiring the art," he drawled. "And you're Delacroix's newest masterpiece, ain't ya?" "I don't know what you mean," I said, clutching the seltzer. "Sure you do." He smiled, that heat-leaching smile. "He keeps you close. Makes me wonder what's so special about you." The band struck up a new song, a slow, bluesy waltz. You mind if you dance with the help? He set his flute down and offered a hand. It was a challenge, a blatant territorial display. I looked past him. Ronan was standing in the doorway, about 20 yards away, watching. His face was a mask of shadows and light, his hands loose in his pockets. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Let him? I put my hand in Silas's. His skin was rough, calloused. He pulled me onto the deck, his hand gripping my waist too tightly. He's got you scared, ain't he? Silas murmured, his breath smelling of champagne and something sour. Don't be. Ronan, he's old news. All that society honor, it's just a fancy cage. Me, I'm the future. He was a terrible dancer. Stiff, jerky, leading with his ego. As he turned me, I saw them. Across the deck, on the upper balcony, one of Ronan's men, the bodyguard from the diner, was standing with a camera, a long telephoto lens aimed right at us. Ronan wasn't just letting Silas play, he was documenting it. Silas spun me, his grip bruising. Tell me, what's a pretty thing like you doing with a fossil like him? I knew what I had to do. Ronan needed to know where Silas was going. Keely's words echoed in my head. He's using you. I'd use him back. He's not a fossil, I said, letting a tremor enter my voice. He's powerful. He's showing me everything, even the engine room. Silas stopped dancing. His eyes narrowed. The engine room. He said, that's where the real power is. I improvised, my heart hammering. He said that's where the Belle Riviere keeps her secrets. I had him. The greed and suspicion in his eyes were a tangible thing. He's a fool then, Silas hissed, pulling me closer, talking that big to a slip of a girl. I leaned in, as if sharing a secret. He said he was going there after this dance. That was the spark. Silas dropped my hand, his facade of the charming rogue evaporating. He looked past me, toward the engine room access door, the one with the brass fan. He needed to get there before Ronan. He needed to check his product. I had just aimed him like a loaded gun. As Silas turned, I stumbled, accidentally changing my footwork, bumping into him. It was just enough to spin him 90 degrees to his left, making him face the upper deck directly. Click. I heard it, or maybe I felt it, the shutter. The bodyguard had the shot, a perfect geo-located photo of Silas Creed on the Belle Riviere at this exact time, staring right at the camera, his face a mask of sudden, murderous urgency. Silas shoved me aside, not caring that I stumbled, and disappeared into the crowd, heading for the engine room. At that exact moment, the sky exploded. Fireworks, red, green, gold, a deafening cascade of bangs and whistles from a barge on the river. The crowd on deck cheered, rushing to the railing. Pop crack! It was a different sound, sharper, drier. It was lost instantly in the boom of a massive aerial shell. A champagne flute on a table 2 feet from my head shattered, glass spraying across the deck. I didn't even have time to scream. A vice gripped my waist. Ronan, he was there, moving with impossible speed, his body covering mine, spinning me away from the railing, pushing me back toward the solid steel of the stairwell. He wasn't gentle. He was a force of nature, an instinctive shield. Down, he yelled, his voice a raw command. We half fell, half ran down the crew's access stairs, tumbling into the noise and heat of the ship's guts. We landed in a narrow, vibrating corridor, the engine room. The air was scalding, thick with the smell of diesel and hot metal. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the paddle wheel was deafening. A giant, iron heartbeat shaking the floor plates. We were alone. We stared at each other, panting. The silk of my dress was sticking to my skin. My hair was falling out of its elegant twist. Are you hit? He demanded, his hands on my shoulders, his eyes scanning me with a frantic, terrifying intensity. No, I don't think so. You're bleeding. He reached up, his fingers, surprisingly gentle, touching my cheek. He brushed something away. I'd been scratched, a shard of the champagne flute. His thumb grazed the cut, and his eyes, those dark river eyes, went black with a rage that had nothing to do with the mission. The air between us was electric, thick with adrenaline and the pounding heat of the engines. He didn't let go of my shoulders. I didn't pull away. My breath hitched, mingling with his. He leaned closer, his gaze dropping to my mouth. The world narrowed to the space between us. The smell of him, the heat. Woo! The ship's whistle. A deafening blast of steam roared from directly above us, shattering the moment. We both flinched, pulling back, the spell broken. I was shaking. Not from the cold, not from the gunshot, from him, from the realization of how close I had come to something. Ronan stepped back, composing himself, the mask of the calm, cold leader snapping back into place. But his voice was rough when he spoke. "You were good up there? With Silas?" He took a clean, white handkerchief from his breast pocket and pressed it into my hand. "Tonight, you survived because of your footwork." It was a compliment, but wrapped in the night's events, in the shadow of Keeley's warning. It felt like a confession. He was admitting I could dance to his tune, and I had. The city's digital skin began to crawl. In the warehouse district, the massive LED billboards that usually sold bourbon or casino shows started to glitch. They flickered, the smiling faces dissolving into static, then reforming into a massive, stark QR code, the same stylized, blocky pattern from the cooler, a fake. Ronan's team, a small group of surgically precise tech specialists working from an unmarked van, had hijacked the entire advertising network. They were flooding the digital streets with bad data, pushing Silas's runners toward pre-selected routes by feeding them false drop points. It was a digital sheepdog, herding the Red Cypress network into a digital corral. While Ronan played his game in gigabytes, I played mine in charcoal. I was no longer just his resident artist. I was his cartographer. I sat in the Bywater studio, my old sketchbook spread open across the glass table. I wasn't looking at the tourists I'd drawn. I was looking at the backgrounds, the graffiti tags on the canal walls, the faded murals on the side of abandoned buildings. Silas's people were sloppy. They'd marked their routes with their own art. A stylized cypress tree with 3 roots always meant a dead drop. A painted heron facing left meant the canal was clear. Facing right meant a patrol. It was a visual language, hidden in plain sight, a map of their physical network spray-painted across the city. My charcoal-smudged fingers traced the lines in my sketches, matching them to a high-detail map of the city's canals and drainage systems. The art matched the infrastructure. I was drawing the web. "You're getting good at this," a voice said. I looked up. A man I hadn't met was standing in the doorway, smiling. He was older than Ronan, with the same dark hair but warmer eyes and an easy grin. He wore a faded linen shirt, unbuttoned one too many. "Harper, this is my cousin, Etienne March," Ronan said, appearing from the shadows of the studio. "He'll be your escort from now on. You're too valuable to be walking around alone, and my face is too well known." Etienne bowed with a theatrical flourish. "At your service, mademoiselle. Ronan here gets all the grim. I get all the charm." He seemed harmless. He drove me, his old Cadillac floating over the potholes as I scouted locations for my art. In reality, I was confirming the drop points my sketches had revealed. We were watching a nondescript side street in mid-city, one I'd marked as a primary handoff point when it happened. A white panel van stenciled with fleur-de-lis organic foods pulled to the curb. My pulse quickened. This was it. Before the driver could even cut the engine, 2 black motorcycles materialized, one at the front bumper, one at the back, penning the van in. The riders, in black helmets and red cypress colors, dismounted. One pulled a crowbar, the other, a handgun. Etienne tensed, his hand moving inside his jacket. "Stay in the car, Harper." "Wait," I whispered, pointing. A third man was there. He hadn't arrived. He had simply appeared. Ronan. He was standing by the van's side door, a shadow detached from the wall. The man with the gun turned, startled. Ronan moved. It wasn't a fight. It was a disassembly. He stepped inside the man's reach, his left hand deflecting the gun upward while his right hand struck the man's wrist. The sound of the bone snapping was a dry, sharp crack that cut through the traffic noise. The gun clattered to the pavement. Ronan's hand continued, grabbing the man's helmet and slamming it, hard into the side of the van. The man crumpled. The second man, the one with the crowbar, froze, his weapon halfway raised. Ronan simply looked at him. He didn't speak. He just held his gaze. The man dropped the crowbar. It rang, loud on the concrete. He put his hands in the air. The entire confrontation had taken less than 3 seconds. Ronan opened the back of the van, looked inside, then nodded. Once. To Etienne. He picked up the fallen handgun by the barrel and slid it into his waistband, then melted back into the alleyway just as sirens began to wail in the distance. Etienne started the car, his charming smile gone, replaced by a pale, sweaty look. The boss. He likes to make a point. The victory was short-lived. The next morning, the war shifted back. The CTIA, tired of being outmaneuvered, went public. It wasn't an arrest, it was a leak. A perfectly timed press release that hit the morning news blogs. Delacroix Foundation accused of art-based money laundering. The story was thin on facts, but thick with insinuation. It painted Ronan as a white-collar criminal, a modern-day Medici, using his family's ill-gotten gains to buy cultural influence. And it named his new artist-in-residence me. My world curdled. Suddenly, I wasn't the plucky sketch artist. I was the accomplice, the muse for the mafia. When I walked to the corner store for coffee, the clerk who usually smiled at me suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. Keely Frost's words echoed in my head. You're an asset. Harper, a tool. I found him at the Bywater studio, staring at a massive, half-finished painting. I was shaking, the rolled-up newspaper clutched in my hand. You lied to me, I said, my voice hoarse. He turned, his face calm. About what? This? I threw the paper onto the glass table. The diner, Keely Frost, the CTIA. You bought the Bayou Bite. You own Mac. You didn't remove him. You just put him on a new leash. You didn't save me. My voice broke, the fear and anger twisting together. You're just using me. All of it, the club, this studio, the dress, it's all just a cage. If you only saved me to use me, Ronan, just say it. Just be honest. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze unwavering. He walked over to me, stopping just out of reach. When I saw you in that booth, he said, his voice low, intense. You were trapped. Mac had you in a corner and you were still fighting. Even without a weapon, I saw myself and I saved you, Harper, because it was you, because I know what that corner feels like. He picked up the newspaper, his eyes scanning the headline, his expression hardening. But this is different. He crumpled the paper in his fist. I am not using you. I am using art. I am using the studio, my club, my name, the billboards, and yes, your goddamned brilliant maps. I am using every tool I have to rip Silas Creed out of this city by his roots, and I will not apologize for it. He was telling the truth, or at least his version of it, a version so compelling I wanted to believe it, even as the city outside was turning against me. The very next day, the chill set in. Etienne was driving me, the mood in the Cadillac tense. My name in the paper had made the escort feel less like protection and more like a guard. We were supposed to be checking a warehouse near the industrial canal, a place my map suggested was Silas's main storage. Etienne's phone, mounted on the dash, chimed with a text. He glanced at it, his face tightening. Damn it, parade route's blocked up ahead. We'll have to detour through Gentilly. He made a sharp, sudden right, turning off the main thoroughfare and onto a quiet residential street. It was a lie. It was October. Parade season was months away. I watched his hand as he reached to dismiss the notification. The screen flared to life for a second. The message was gone, but the icon for the app remained. It wasn't a standard text message. It was a stylized, dark red cypress tree, the symbol of Silas's outfit. My blood turned to ice. He's in on it. He's driving me into a trap. In that same second, in a black sedan parked 2 blocks away, Ronan Delacroix was listening. A tiny, sophisticated listening device, planted in his cousin's car weeks ago, fed the audio directly to his earpiece. He heard the text chime. He heard Etienne's lie about the parade, and then he heard the low, muffled voice of the call Etienne picked up a moment later. "Yeah, I have her. Turning onto Desire Street now. She's all yours." Ronan's eyes, watching the sedan's icon move on his laptop screen, didn't change. They didn't fill with rage or betrayal. They went perfectly, terrifyingly still. They froze. He knew. And he was letting the line go taut, letting the fish take the bait, even if the bait was me. That night, I was a wreck. I was back in my apartment, the 3 locks feeling useless. I didn't know that Ronan knew. I only knew that his cousin, his blood, had tried to sell me to Silas, and I had only been saved because Etienne's car had, miraculously, blown a tire before we reached the rendezvous, a coincidence, or so I thought. There was a knock on my door. I nearly screamed. It was Ronan. He didn't say anything, just looked at me, at my pale face, my shaking hands. He saw the terror. "Come with me," he said. He took me to Ledoux Phantom. It was 3 a.m. The club was empty, dark, smelling of spilled bourbon and old saxophone notes. Only a single, blue ghost light glowed on the stage. "You're out of rhythm," he said, his voice soft in the huge, empty room. "You're thinking about the steps. You're thinking about the fall." He took my hand and pulled me onto the small wooden dance floor. In the dark, there was no music. "You're safe here," he said, the same words he'd used in the diner. He put his hand on my waist. "Now, we count. Just count. Follow me." He began to move, leading me in a slow, simple box step, a waltz for 2 people in a dark, silent room. "1," he murmured, his voice a low vibration against my temple as he pulled me close. 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I was stiff, my body rigid with fear. "Breathe, Harper," he commanded, his voice gentle but firm. "Stop thinking. Just feel the count." I closed my eyes. I leaned my head against his chest. I could feel his heart, a slow, steady, powerful beat beneath my ear. I matched my breathing to it. 1, 2, 3. My feet started to follow. My body softened. The shaking subsided. We danced in the blue shadowed darkness, to no music but the sound of his voice, counting, and the steady, reliable beat of his heart. It was a promise, a suspension. It was a lie, and it was the only truth I had. He was teaching me to dance in the eye of the storm he had created. Keely Frost didn't knock. She found me at the coffee shop on the corner, the one where the clerk now ignored me. She slid into the booth opposite me, her severe pantsuit looking armored, her gaze as cold as the morning's iced coffee. "The gala was a nice touch," she said, no preamble. "You play the part well, but the show's over." She placed a thick manila envelope on the table. "This is a formal offer. Immunity. You're a witness, not a target. We know about the maps you've been drawing. We know about the photographs from the doc, your art. Miss Vale, it's evidence. Give us the originals. All of them, the sketches, the negatives. Give us a full statement on Delacroix's operations. In return, the file on you disappears, the old trespassing charge, the new art laundering insinuation. All of it. You get a clean slate, you get to walk away." I stared at the envelope. A life raft. The one she'd promised. But it wasn't a life raft. It was a trade. My art for his life. "And if I don't?" Keely's smile was thin, sharp. "Then you're not a witness. You're a co-conspirator. You're part of the Refine Nola press release. You're the girl he used to wash his money. When we take him down, you go down too. You have 24 hours. She stood, leaving the envelope, and walked out, a sterile, righteous storm leaving a trail of ice in her wake. I sat there, my stomach a knot of cold acid, my art, my sketches of the city's bones, my grandfather's camera, the darkroom in my tub. They were the only things that were ever truly mine. Now they were just evidence. And Ronan, the man who had lied, manipulated, and caged me, was also the man who had danced with me in the dark to the sound of his own heart, just to calm my shaking. He was a monster, but he was becoming my monster. And Keely was asking me to put the collar on him. He must have seen the conflict in my face when he found me back at the Bywater studio. I was standing in front of my map, my hands gray with charcoal, my mind screaming. "She found you," he said. "It wasn't a question." I nodded, mute. "Keely plays one game, and one game only," he said, his voice flat. "She burns everything to the ground and calls the ashes justice. You can't win her game. You can only refuse to play." He took the charcoal pencil from my numb fingers. "Pack your camera. We're leaving. Not your apartment. Not here. Somewhere safe." "Safe," I laughed, the sound hollow. "Nowhere is safe. Ronan, you made me a target. Your cousin tried to sell me. Your enemies tried to shoot me. Your government is trying to flip me. Where exactly is safe?" He looked at me, his gaze softening, losing its hard, tactical edge. Somewhere of mine, somewhere they can't find, somewhere different. The house was not in the city. It was 20 minutes out, where the road narrowed and the ancient oaks dripped Spanish moss. It was an old Creole cottage, tucked behind a high, crumbling brick wall, invisible from the street. The air was heavy, perfumed with the dizzying, sweet scent of sweet olive. It was his mother's house. It hadn't been lived in for a decade, but it was clean, kept perfectly, a shrine. It was the opposite of the Bywater studio, where the studio was industrial metal and cold glass. This was warm, scarred wood and old linen, where the studio was his fortress. This was his memory. He led me into the kitchen. There was no stainless steel, just a massive red brick hearth, a scorch mark still visible on the wooden mantel above it. My grandfather cooked a cochon de lait in here for my mother's 20th birthday, nearly burned the house down. He was different here. The coiled, controlled energy was gone. He seemed softer, the lines around his eyes deeper, sadder. "Why bring me here, Ronan?" "Because I trust this place," he said simply, "and I don't want them to have you." We sat on the wide, screened-in porch as the sun went down, the humidity of the day breaking, the sky turning a deep, bruised purple. The only sound was the drone of cicadas. I told him about the hurricane, the one that took my parents. I told him about the shelter, the Superdome, the noise, and the feeling of being completely, utterly alone in a sea of 10,000 people. I told him how I started sketching, just to have a world I could control, just to draw lines that made sense when nothing else did. He listened. He just listened. Then he spoke, his voice low, aimed at the darkening trees. I was 12. My father. He broke one of the society's rules, a code of honor. He protected a man he shouldn't have, a man who had betrayed the family, the society. They have their own laws. He looked at his hands, at the black ring. They came to the house. My uncles, my grandfather, they didn't yell. They were polite. And they took my father out onto the lawn in the rain. And they made him kneel. And they bound him by their law. I watched from my window. He never made a sound. He just accepted it. I stood there, watching the rain. And I learned what law really means. It's not what's written, it's what's enforced. He turned his gaze to me. I am not my father. Harper, I will not kneel, but I am bound by that law all the same. The storm broke. The sky opened up. A tropical deluge, the rain hammering on the tin roof, a sudden, violent percussion. It wasn't a soft rain. It was a cleansing, angry sound. We stood, watching it. The air was charged. The distance between us, the one he had so carefully maintained, was gone, erased by the shared stories, by the sanctuary of the house. He moved first. He didn't reach for me. He just touched the small scar on my cheek, the one from the broken champagne flute. His thumb traced it, his touch impossibly, agonizingly gentle. "He marked you," he whispered, his voice rough with an emotion I couldn't name. "I'm not one of your paintings. Ronan, I'm not something you own." "I know," he said, and his eyes, for the first time, were stripped of all artifice, all control. They were just dark and deep and full of the rain. I don't know who kissed who. It didn't matter. It was a collision, a sudden, absolute surrender to the gravity that had been pulling us together since that night in the diner. His mouth was not gentle. It was desperate. A long, searching kiss that tasted of the storm. My hands, still gray with charcoal, came up to grip his shirt, holding on as if the floor had dropped out from under me. He pulled me from the porch into one of the bedrooms. The shutters were painted a faded, pale blue. The rain was deafening, rattling the glass. He kicked the door shut. He broke the kiss only to look at me, his breath ragged, his forehead pressed to mine. "Harper," he said, his voice a plea, a question. My answer was to bring my hand to his face, my thumb tracing the scar on his jaw. It was absolute. It was consent. It was the only choice I had made in weeks that was entirely, completely my own. His jacket fell from his shoulders, pooling on the floor. My hands were shaking as I unbuttoned his shirt, my fingers clumsy. He was shaking, too. His control was shattered. He wasn't the boss, the strategist, the monster. He was just a man, in a storm, in his mother's house. He laid me back on the old bed, the sheets smelling of cedar and lavender. The room was dark, lit only by the occasional flash of lightning. Rain lashed the blue shutters. He moved over me, and the world dissolved into sensation, the scrape of his stubble against my neck, the tangle of our breathing, lost in the roar of the rain. His lips, his hands, learning the lines of my body, not as a map, but as a prayer. His heart hammering against mine, a frantic, shared rhythm, the sound of it mixing with the storm until I could not tell one from the other. We held each other, a tight, desperate embrace, as the storm raged outside, and the private, quiet storm inside finally broke. We lay in the dark for a long time after, the rain softening to a steady, rhythmic tapping. His arm was heavy across my waist, anchoring me. "Keely's offer," I said, my voice quiet in the new stillness. "She wants the negatives. She wants me to testify." He tensed, but he didn't pull away. I won't force you," he said, his voice rough. "If justice is what you need, if you think her version of it is right, I will not stop you from walking out that door. I mean that." I turned, pressing my face against his chest. "I don't believe in her justice, and I don't believe in your law. I'm tired of being a pawn." "Then stop being one," he murmured, his hand finding mine in the dark. "Be a queen." The next morning, the sun was bright, the world washed clean. My phone, which I'd left charging in the kitchen, was buzzing, a dozen alerts from a news app. Keely hadn't waited for my answer. She had leaked a news story. This one was all about me. Falsified bank statements showing large, six-figure deposits into an account with my name on it. A faked email exchange between me and Mac, discussing how to handle the art sales. It was clumsy. Obvious, but effective. She was painting me as the mastermind, the greedy girlfriend who had seduced the kingpin. She was burning my reputation to the ground to force my hand. I showed the phone to Ronan. He looked at it, his jaw hardening. He didn't get angry. He got busy. He spent 2 hours on the phone, his voice cold, precise, and lethal. By noon, he'd moved. He didn't just refute Keely's story, he changed the narrative. He held an emergency press conference, not at a corporate office, but on the steps of a failing music school in the Treme. He announced the official launch of the Refine NOLA Foundation. He wasn't just funding art, he was funding scholarships, buying new instruments for the school, underwriting a program to rebuild the waterfront. He was turning his black money, his society-backed assets into clean, undeniable good. He was cutting the rod out, publicly. He made Keeley's smear look like a petty, desperate attack. That evening, back at the Creole house, the air was tense again, the war was back on. My phone rang. It was an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The text came a minute later. It was Etienne. "Harper, I'm sorry. I was in debt to Silas. He had my daughter. I know where he is. A real warehouse. Chalmette. He's moving everything tonight. I owe you. This is the real spot. Please, you have to tell Ronan. It's the only way I can make it right." I stared at the message, the betrayal, the desperate plea. It felt so real. I showed it to Ronan. He read it. His face an unreadable mask. He knew. I knew he knew. From that night in the car, this was the real trap. This was Etienne, bought and paid for, luring us to our end. Ronan looked up from the phone, his dark eyes meeting mine. He didn't tell me it was a lie. He didn't tell me it was a trap. He just said, "What do you want to do?" He was leaving the choice to me. He was letting me choose to trust, or to see the board, just as he did. He was handing me the crown. I held the phone. Etienne's text glowing like a poison dart. "What do you want to do?" Ronan had asked. I had chosen. I tapped the screen, replying to Etienne, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "I'm in, but I can't meet Ronan. He's being watched. I have to deliver the map to you, my way." I didn't choose to trust Etienne. I chose to use his betrayal. "If they want my art," I told Ronan back at the studio, "I'll give them art." The next day, I was on the levee at Algiers Point in broad daylight. I wasn't sketching tourists. I was painting. A massive 10-foot mural on the concrete flood wall, part of a community beautification project Ronan's new foundation had approved in less than an hour. I painted a massive, stylized fleur-de-lis. Its petals weren't petals, they were intricate, blocky patterns that dissolved into a complex, scannable square. It looked like abstract art. It was a QR code, my fake map. I was painting a digital trap for all the city to see, knowing Silas's scouts, and maybe even the CTIA, were watching me. The code, when scanned, led to a deserted shipyard 3 miles upriver. I was leading the rats into a maze, while Ronan prepared the real trap. Ronan's war was being fought on a second front, in the Bywater studio. His tech team, a pair of quiet geniuses who looked like they should be in a college library, were launching their primary weapon. They called it Bayou Chain. It was a custom-built cold wallet, a digital honeypot. "Silas is spooked," Ronan explained, his eyes fixed on a screen of cascading green code. "Your dance on the riverboat worked. He knows his shipping routes are compromised. He's liquidating, moving his crypto assets. The fake QR codes on the billboards. My mural, they weren't just decoys, they were delivery systems. When any Red Cypress member scanned them, it triggered a security update that secretly installed a tracker, a shadow, on their crypto wallets. Now," Ronan said, pointing to the screen, "every time they move $1, it casts a shadow. A permanent, public shadow on a blockchain we control. He thinks he's hiding in the digital dark. We're making him write his confession in permanent, public ink, for everyone to see." The night of the operation was hot, the air thick and smelling of sugarcane processing from the plant in Chalmette. This was the real warehouse, the one Ronan's own surveillance had pinpointed weeks ago, not the decoy from Etienne's text. We didn't come in silent, black vans. We came with joy. From 3 blocks away, the sound of a trumpet blast split the night, a full, glorious brass band, a second line, complete with a grand marshal in a feathered hat, was weaving its way through the deserted industrial streets. It was a community protest, organized by the Refine NOLA Foundation, decrying new zoning laws. Dozens of people marched, waving signs, drinking and dancing. The music was a deafening, ecstatic roar of tubas, trombones, and snare drums. And under the cover of that celebration, Ronan's team, 6 of them, dressed in black, slipped over the main chain-link fence, their bolt cutters completely masked by a raucous drum solo. I was with them, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, the beaded clutch from the gala, now holding my tools, tight in my hand. We were inside. The warehouse was vast, dark, and smelled of rust and the canal. The music was a dull, vibrating pulse from outside. "Etienne is on the move," Ronan's tech guy whispered in his earpiece, monitoring the tracker. "He's approaching the west perimeter." Ronan just nodded, his face a grim mask in the shadows. We heard a metallic scrape, a side gate. One we hadn't breached was sliding open. Etienne. He was letting Silas in, leading him to the trap he thought he was setting for Ronan. "He's here," I whispered, pulling back into the deep shadow of a shipping container. "I know," Ronan said, his voice deadly calm, "and he didn't come alone." Headlights suddenly flooded the massive warehouse yard, but they weren't coming from the side gate. They were at the main entrance. 2, then 3, then 6 black SUVs, their sirens suddenly erupting, splitting the night. Blue and red lights strobed across the corrugated walls, turning the yard into a nightmare disco. "CTIA," a voice roared over a megaphone. "Federal agents, we have the building surrounded. Show your hands." Silas, who had just stepped through the side gate with his men, froze. He saw the swarm of agents pouring through the main gate. He looked at Etienne, his pale green eyes slits of pure, venomous hatred. He understood. This was Ronan's move, the checkmate. He had anticipated the betrayal. He had called Keely Frost. He had given her an anonymous tip, pointing her to this exact warehouse at this exact time. He'd set his 2 greatest enemies, Silas and the CTIA, on a collision course. Gunfire erupted. The CTIA was moving in, and Silas's men were firing back, using the chaos to retreat, to scatter. "This way!" Silas roared, firing blindly toward the agents. He wasn't running toward the main gate. He was running toward the back of the warehouse, toward the dark water of the canal, toward his escape route. "Ronan, let them go," I said, pulling his arm. "Let the feds have them. We're done." "No," he said, his voice a growl. He was pulling me toward the center of the warehouse, away from the fight. "He's not getting away. The proof isn't here. It's under here." We stopped in a dark, empty section of the concrete floor. "The manifests were blank," he muttered, scanning the ground with a flashlight. "This is just a shell. The real lab is close. It has to be." I looked down. The concrete was stained, old, but one large section was patched with rough-hewn wooden planks, like a makeshift trapdoor. My breath caught. The pattern. The way the wood grain swirled around a dark knot, forming a perfect accidental spiral. "I've seen this," I whispered. My hands were shaking. I fumbled in my clutch, pulling out my old, worn sketchbook. I flipped past the tourists, past the balconies of the Quarter. There it was. A quick 2-minute charcoal sketch I'd done months ago at a failing lumber yard in the Irish Channel, a pile of discarded, rain-warped wood, with this exact, peculiar spiral knot. "That lumber yard," I said, my finger tracing the charcoal. "It was a red cypress front. I sketched it. This wood. It came from there." Ronan didn't hesitate. He jammed a crowbar from a nearby toolkit under the planks and pulled. The wood splintered, revealing a hidden steel ring. He tore the trapdoor open, revealing a set of dark, narrow concrete stairs. The smell hit us first, a sharp chemical reek, like burnt plastic and ammonia. The cellar was small, cramped. In the center, under a single bare bulb, was a large, industrial pill press. Bags of white powder and chemical precursors were stacked against the wall. And on a metal table, 3 external hard drives, plugged into a humming, blinking server rack. "The ledger," Ronan breathed. "The real one, every deal, every payment, every name." A shadow fell down the stairs. "Noble of you. Delacroix finding my nest." Silas Creed stood on the steps, his pale eyes glittering. He wasn't alone. 2 of his men flanked him, guns raised. He had circled back. Boom! The sound was deafening in the small space. Ronan had moved before I even saw Silas's finger tighten. He shoved me back, hard, behind a thick steel support column, just as bullets chewed the concrete where I had been standing. Get in the cistern, he roared, pointing to an old, empty iron water tank in the corner of the cellar. It's iron, it'll hold. He shoved me toward it, firing 2 precise, deafening shots from his own handgun, forcing Silas's men back up the stairs. Ronan, no, I'm not hiding. This isn't a discussion, he yelled, his face a mask of cold fury. He pushed me through the open hatch of the cistern and slammed it shut, the heavy steel door clanging with a sound of terrible finality. He threw the latch. I was locked in the dark. I heard the gunfire, muffled through the steel. 3 shots, then 4, yelling, a heavy thud. I would not be his liability. I would not be the woman he died protecting. Be a queen. I fumbled in my clutch, my fingers closing around the tiny, high-lumen projector I used for tracing my mural designs. I had the hard drives. In the split second before he locked me in, my hand had swept them from the table. I plugged the drive into the projector's USB port, the device whirred to life, its lens a single, bright eye in the total darkness. I aimed it at the only other opening in the cistern, a small, 4-inch overflow pipe near the top. Outside! I heard Ronan yell, a sharp, guttural sound of pain. I angled the projector. The beam shot out of the pipe, a narrow, focused stream of light. It hit the massive, flat, corrugated wall of the warehouse's exterior, high above the chaos of the gunfight below. The data exploded onto the wall. It wasn't a picture. It was text. It was spreadsheets, account numbers, shipping manifests, Cayman Islands routing info, names, dates, amounts. I was turning Silas's digital ledger into a 50-foot-high work of art. I was projecting his entire criminal enterprise onto the side of the building, right in the middle of a CTIA raid. The gunfire stopped. I heard a new voice. Keely Frost. What the hell is that? Get a camera on it? Now all units, cease fire. Secure the projection. I want that wall photographed. I fumbled with the latch from the inside. It wouldn't budge. I hammered on the steel door. Ronan, let me out! The latch scraped open. The door swung wide. Ronan was leaning against the wall, his hand pressed to his side, his shirt dark and wet with blood, but he was alive. Silas and his men were gone, vanished back up the stairs and into the night. Keely Frost stood at the bottom of the steps, her gun aimed at Ronan. Her eyes were wide, staring at the data still streaming across the outside wall. Keely, I said, stepping out of the cistern, the projector hot in my hand, the hard drives in the other. You wanted the evidence. There it is. Your case. All of it. She looked at me, at Ronan, at the pill press. She looked at the blood spreading across Ronan's shirt. Her face was a storm of conflicting duties. Ronan Delacroix, you are under... She stopped. She looked at the hard drive in my hand, the source of the data. She saw the wound on Ronan's side. She saw that we hadn't run. She slowly, agonizingly, lowered her handgun. Get him out of here, she said, her voice a low growl, all tactical. The ambulance is for my agent who got hit upstairs. You're on your own, but Delacroix. He met her gaze, breathing heavily. We're not done, she said. This changes things. But we are not done. She raised her hand as if to put the cuffs on, then looked at the data again. She let her hand drop. Go, she said. Tonight, you're just a witness, but the sun comes up in an hour. The morning news was a split-screen reality. On one channel, grainy footage of the CTIA raid in Chalmette, with anchors speculating wildly about an inter-gang war. On the other, a bright, tear-jerking segment about the refined NOLA Foundation. Ronan's emergency fund, announced just hours before the raid, had saved the Treem 90-day music school from permanent closure. The city, which had been ready to convict him, was now deeply, fiercely divided. Half saw him as the monster Keely had painted. The other half saw him as a philanthropist, a true son of the city, the only one stepping up to save its cultural bones. Ronan was in the Bywater studio, his side heavily bandaged. A doctor affiliated with the society had stitched him up with 12 perfect sutures in his mother's kitchen, the bullet having passed clean through the muscle. He was standing, though he moved stiffly. When two of his men brought Etienne March in, his cousin was a wreck. His charming smile was gone, replaced by a gray, hollow-eyed terror. He wasn't in cuffs, but he might as well have been. He fell to his knees in front of Ronan. "Ronan, please!" he whimpered, tears streaming down his face. "He had my daughter. He threatened Elodie. I swear, on my father's grave. I didn't have a choice." Ronan was silent. He just stared at his cousin, his face a mask of granite. The punishment for betraying the society, for selling blood to an enemy, was absolute. There was no appeal. "He's finished," Etienne choked out. "But his people, they're still out there. The prejudice. My Elodie, she's only 8. She's innocent. She has the family name. Please, Ronan, whatever you do to me, whatever I deserve, protect her. Don't let her be punished for what I did. Don't let them mark her for this." It was a plea for mercy in a world that didn't have a word for it. I watched Ronan's hands. His right hand was clenched, the knuckles white, the embodiment of the law he'd seen bind his own father. His left hand, the one with the ring, was open, his fingers slightly spread, as if weighing the cost. Mercy and justice, blood and law, they were at war inside him, and the silence in the studio was louder than any gunshot. He turned his head, just slightly. "Get him out of my sight," he said, his voice a low rasp. "Take him to the house on Esplanade. Keep him there. His daughter is to be put in a private school in Baton Rouge, today, under a different name. She is not to be touched." And me, Ronan?" Etienne whispered, hope flickering in his eyes. Ronan's gaze snapped to him, and it was so cold, so devoid of life that Etienne flinched. "You will stay in that house until I decide what you means." He turned his back on his cousin, a dismissal more final than any execution. 2 days later, Keely Frost met us, not in an alley, not in a coffee shop, but in her sterile, glass-walled office at the CTIA building. The power dynamic had been completely reset. The hard drives I had given her, combined with the data I projected on the warehouse wall, had been a bombshell. They implicated 3 Port Authority officials and a city councilman. Keely's career was made, but the rot was deeper than she knew. "The data is extensive," she said, her voice clipped. Professional. She was no longer the hunter, she was a negotiator. "We've decapitated the Red Cypress leadership, but the body is still twitching. Silas Creed is gone, vanished, but his network, his runners, his street-level dealers, they're still here, blind and desperate." She looked at me. "Your maps, your graffiti translations, they're more accurate than our satellite surveillance. You don't just see the locations, you understand the language." She steepled her fingers. "So here's the new deal. It's the only deal. I'm not prosecuting Ronan Delacroix today. The public is on his side. And frankly, he just handed me the biggest case of my career. But I can't let him walk. The optics are impossible." "So," she continued, "Mr. Delacroix will agree to supervised monitoring, non-negotiable." "A leash," Ronan said, his voice a quiet growl. "A compromise," Keely shot back. "And in return, Miss Vale will become a special consultant for this agency. You will continue to do exactly what you've been doing. You'll read the silent map of this city for us. You will help us dismantle the rest of Silas's network, piece by piece, before a new boss takes his place." Ronan looked at me. It was my choice. "And Ronan?" I asked. "He stays out of it," Keely said. "He becomes what he claims to be, the philanthropist. He runs his clubs and his foundations. He stays clean, and I get Silas's entire network." "I'll do it," I said, before Ronan could object. He hated it. I could see the visceral rejection in his jaw. The next day, A federal officer came to the Bywater studio and clamped a thick, black plastic band around Ronan's left ankle. He stared at it, his expression one of utter contempt. He was a king in his own city, and he had just bent the knee, submitting to a system he despised, all to protect the end game. The war with Silas wasn't over, not by a long shot, but he had just been benched, electronically. I went to work. I didn't go to Keeley's office. I worked from the studio. I began a new series, 9 large-scale charcoal drawings. I called it The Silent Map. It was the best work I had ever done. The first piece was a hyper-realistic rendering of a specific drainage tunnel by the canal. The spray-painted heron tag the only spot of implied color. The second, a gnarled wooden piling on the docks, its base carved with 3 almost invisible lines. The third, a forgotten street shrine, its saint's eyes seemingly watching a specific alley. Each drawing was a key. Each time I finished one, I sent a high-resolution photo to Keeley, and within hours, a CTIA team would move, raiding the tunnel, finding the drop point, seizing the product hidden in the piling. With every stroke of charcoal, I was dismantling Silas's escape routes. I was waging a quiet, artistic war, and we were winning. Silas, wherever he was hiding, was feeling it, and he retaliated, not with bullets, but with filth. The online smear campaign was brutal. The evidence Keeley had faked was old news. This was new. A gossip blog, one known for its ruthlessness, suddenly posted a story, Mafia's Mall, an inside look at Harper Vale's art. It was full of photographs, grainy, long lens shots, me sitting in a car, laughing with a man, me at a diner, the man's hand on my arm, me in an alley, him leaning in, his face close to mine. The man was Mac Dillard. They were fakes, clever, vicious composites. My face, my hair, stitched onto another woman's body, intimate moments seemingly captured by a private investigator, all designed to paint me as Mac's lover, a grifter who had played him, then played Ronan. The online comments were a sewer. I was a whore, a gold digger, a traitor. I felt sick. It was a digital violation, a character assassination that made Keeley's attempt look like child's play. The next day, the Refine NOLA Foundation had a scheduled community meeting, a follow-up at the Trem Music School. My name was on the program. "You don't have to go," Ronan said, his voice quiet. The ankle monitor under his tailored trousers made him walk with a slightly different, more rigid gait. "Yes, I do," I said, my voice shaking. "If I hide, they win." The room was packed, not just with grateful parents, but with local bloggers, a few cynical reporters, all smelling blood. I stood at the podium, trying to talk about the new scholarship fund, but the questions started almost immediately. "Miss Vale, what's your relationship with Mac Dillard? Is it true you were his partner before you moved on to Delacroix? How much of the foundation's money is going into your pocket?" I froze. The room was spinning. The words wouldn't come. Then, the back doors of the auditorium opened. Ronan Delacroix walked in. He didn't say a word. He just walked down the center aisle, the crowd parting for him, a silent, powerful wave. He walked up the steps, his gaze sweeping the hostile reporters, and stood, not at the podium, not next to me. He stood 3 feet behind me. To my left, his hands were clasped in front of him. He said nothing. He didn't have to. The message was as loud as a gunshot. "She is mine. She is protected. Ask another question. I dare you." The room went dead silent. A reporter lowered his camera. The bloggers stopped typing. I took a breath. My voice was clear as a bell. "The scholarship fund will be accepting its first applications on Monday. Next question." That night, Ronan had one more piece of business. He'd found out that Mac, emboldened by the smear campaign, had been trying to sell his own evidence, the original, real security footage of me at the server station, to a rival tabloid. We went to the Bayou Bite. It was 10:30 p.m., the middle of the dinner rush. Ronan walked in, me at his side. The hostess's eyes went wide. Frankie, the bartender, dropped a glass. "Where is he?" Ronan asked. Mac came bustling out of the kitchen, his polo shirt stained, Ronan, sir, what an honor. Can I get you your booth? You're fired, Mac, Ronan said, his voice quiet, but it cut through the diner's clatter. Mac's smile froze. What, sir? I don't understand. You used this diner to run your own pathetic side deals. You extorted your staff, and you tried to sell faked evidence to a tabloid? You're a liability. Ronan turned to the entire staff, who were frozen, watching. My name is Ronan Delacroix. As of 3 weeks ago, I own this establishment. As of 30 seconds ago, Mr. Dillard is no longer employed here. He turned back to Mac. Get out! You can't do this, Mac blustered, his face turning purple. I'll sue. I have things. You have nothing, Ronan said, except a 30-second head start before I call the NOPD and report the $1,000 you skimmed from the register last night. I have the footage. Mac's color drained. He looked at me, his eyes full of hatred, then at Ronan, who was immovable. He ripped off his apron, threw it on the floor, and shoved his way out the front door. Ronan turned to the stunned staff. Anyone here who had their pay docked or was forced to work unpaid overtime by that man will receive a check for double the amount tomorrow. My apologies for your treatment. He turned and walked out. I followed him, my legs unsteady. We stood in the alleyway, the one where he'd had Mac's cooler delivered, the one that smelled of spoiled milk and the river. The air was cool, quiet. I was free. After all the bullets, the data, the spies, and the lies, this one, small, greasy man, was the root of it all, and he was gone. A sound, half laugh, half sob, tore itself from my chest. I leaned against the brick wall, and the tears I hadn't shed, not for the guns, not for the smears, not for the fear, finally came. I cried, not for sadness, for a sheer, profound, bone-deep relief. The feeling of a weight, one I had carried for so long I'd mistaken it for my own spine, finally being lifted. I felt him move closer. He didn't touch me. He didn't put his arm around me. He just stood there, a silent presence in the dark. After a moment, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a clean, white, folded handkerchief. He pressed it into my hand. I looked up at him, my face wet, my breath catching. He wasn't smiling, he just looked tired. A deep, weary exhaustion in his eyes. He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod, a shared victory, a quiet acknowledgement of the cost. He'd cut off the last piece of my old life, and he'd done it cleanly, just as I'd asked. The quiet war, the one I fought with charcoal and code, was over. The loud one was about to begin. I was at a small, independent print shop in the Marigny, using their etching press to transfer one of my silent map drawings onto a copper plate. The air was sharp with the metallic tang of acid and thick, black ink. My CTIA handler, a nervous junior agent named Peters, was posted by the door, scrolling through his phone. It was late, past 10. And a sudden squall had hit the city, the rain coming down in hard, rattling sheets, turning the streetlights into blurry watercolors. I heard a thud outside, not a knock, a heavy, dull sound. "Peters," I called out, wiping my inky hands on a rag. The door swung open, slamming against the wall. It wasn't Peters. 2 men, dressed in black, their faces masked, filled the doorway, the rain whipping in around them. They moved with a terrifying, silent speed before I could even scream. One had me. His arm clamped around my chest, lifting me off my feet. The other grabbed my face, pressing a thick rag over my nose and mouth. The smell was sickly sweet, chemical, overwhelming. The world didn't fade. It was ripped away, a hard, violent cut to black. When Ronan arrived, summoned by the panic button I'd never had time to touch, the shop was chaos. The acid bath was overturned, the window was shattered, and Peters was slumped in the alley, unconscious. I was gone. On the heavy steel bed of the etching press, where my copper plate had been, lay a single, scorched fleur-de-lis. It was still smoking. The metal underneath warped from the heat. It was a brand, a challenge, a scream. Ronan stood in the wrecked shop, the rain blowing in, plastering his black shirt to his chest. He stared at the burnt symbol, his face utterly, terrifyingly calm. But I knew that calm. It was the eye of the storm. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. It was a link to a private live stream. He clicked it. My face filled the screen. I was conscious. My eyes wide with terror, duct tape stripping my mouth. I was tied to a heavy metal chair. The background was dark, but the sound was unmistakable water, lapping against old wood. Then, Silas's voice, distorted, mechanical. The girl for the data, Delacroix, not the copies you gave the feds, the original ledgers, the society accounts, everything. You come alone, or she swims with her art. Ronan looked down at his left ankle. The black plastic monitor, the symbol of his compromise, his leash. He sat on the stool, pulled up his pant leg, and took a thin, flat piece of metal from a hidden seam in his wallet. It was a bypass tool, a sliver of society-crafted steel designed for one purpose. He didn't try to disable the tracker, or he didn't try to shield it. He jammed the tool into the main processor, shorting the entire device with a sharp, electronic sizzle and a puff of smoke. He killed it. He was cutting his own line. If he was caught now, he wasn't just a parole violator. He was a fugitive, self-incriminating, validating every charge Keeley had ever leveled. He was choosing me over his name, his freedom, his entire structured world. In her sterile office tower, a bank of red lights flashed on Keeley Frost's monitor. Subject Delacroix, R. Monitor offline, status tamper, violation immediate. Protocol was absolute. Alert all units, issue a federal warrant, bring him in, dead or alive. She put her hand on the tactical mouse. Her eyes darted to another screen. My tracker, the small, optional device she'd insisted I carry. Its blue dot was pulsing, stationary. From the middle of the river, Pont St. Jude, Pier 12, the same abandoned dock from my photographs. Keeley stared at the two flashing lights. The red one meant her career. The blue one meant my life. I had kept my word. I had delivered her a war chest of data. I had been her perfect, unwilling consultant, and I had saved her and her team in that warehouse. She owed me. Her jaw tightened. She looked at the flashing red light. 1 minute passed. 5, the silent, screaming alarm. 10. She set a small timer on her desk. 30 minutes, she whispered to the empty room. You get 30 minutes. Harper, then I bring the storm. The rain at the docks was a cold, driving force. I was soaked, my hair plastered to my face, shivering, the zip ties cutting into my wrists. Pier 12 was even more dilapidated than I remembered. The wood rotten, the river churning a few feet below. Silas Creed was pacing, his swamp-green eyes manic. He was a cornered animal. My silent map and Ronan's bayou chain had choked him, and he knew it. On a rusted oil drum sat his laptop, and next to it the backup hard drives from the warehouse, the ones Ronan's team had missed, the complete, unedited ledger. "He's not coming," Silas spat, kicking a piling. "He's letting you die. He's a coward, just like his father." He grabbed my hair, yanking my head back, and aimed his phone at my face. "One last chance. Delacroix, you hear me? The data for the girl I'm done playing." He ripped the duct tape from my mouth. I gasped, sucking in the cold, wet air. I looked straight into the camera, straight at Ronan, wherever he was, whatever he was seeing. I couldn't speak, but I could move my head. I began to nod. Not a shiver, not a tremble, a rhythm. Nod, 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 pause, nod, pause, nod. It was our count, the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, the waltz in the dark of Ledoux Phantom. It was the rhythm he'd used to steady my heart. Now, I was using it to steady his. I am here. I am ready. The beat is set. A mile downriver, in the driving rain. Ronan saw it, his hand, which had been gripping the wheel of his airboat. Relaxed. The code was received. He wasn't just coming to save a victim. He was coming for his partner. He was not alone. As he glided the boat forward, its engine a low whisper, 6 shapes slipped from the muddy bank into the black, churning water. His team, they wore matte black rebreathers, their snorkels designed to diffuse the exhale. Leaving no bubbles, no wake, they were ghosts, swimming toward the pier's pilings. Ronan was the target. They were the teeth. Ronan's boat slid into view, a dark shape in the storm. He cut the engine, letting the current carry him the last 100 yards. He stood on the bow, his hands raised, illuminated in the single, harsh floodlight Silas had set up. "Silas!" he yelled, his voice carrying over the wind. "I'm here. I'm alone. Let her go." Silas laughed, a high, thin sound. "Fool, you really came. Bring the boat in slowly, my men will meet you." 2 of Silas's men moved toward the edge of the pier. At that exact second, a deafening boom tore the night apart. A fireball bloomed at the far end of the pier, where Silas's own escape airboat, the green one I remembered, exploded into 1,000 flaming pieces. The shockwave hit us like a physical fist. The entire pier buckled, heaving, throwing everyone to the slick, wet wood. My heavy chair, which had been on the most stable section, skidded wildly and toppled onto its side, slamming me against the deck. The pain was electric, but the position was a gift. The chair had landed inches from a jagged piece of rebar, a rusted metal spike sticking up from the pier's broken concrete foundation. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1. I ignored the chaos. I ignored the gunfire that had suddenly erupted. I began to saw, bucking my body, dragging the thick zip ties on my wrists against the sharp, rusted metal. Cut, 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 pause, cut, cut, pause. I was dancing, tied to a chair, in the middle of a war. Ronan was already on the pier, moving through the smoke, a shadow in the storm. His team, surfacing like monsters from the deep, had already engaged Silas's men. It was a close, brutal, silent fight. Then it was just 2, Ronan and Silas. Silas, his gun lost, scrambled up, pulling a long, thin knife. The distant, ironic pop, pop, pop of the nightly tourist fireworks started up across the river, a mocking soundtrack to the fight. Silas lunged, a snake's speed. Ronan didn't meet the blade. He moved inside the lunge, crowding Silas, letting the knife's edge slice deep into his left forearm, a willing sacrifice to gain control of the wrist. Blood, black in the floodlight, mixed instantly with the rain. Ronan's other hand, the one with the signet ring, drove forward, not a fist, but a solid, hard palm strike straight into Silas's throat. Silas gagged, stumbling back, his eyes wide with shock. The zip ties on my wrists snapped. I was free. I scrambled on my hands and knees. They were locked together, a desperate, slippery grapple at the edge of the pier. Silas wasn't trying to win. He was trying to reach. His hand was outstretched toward the oil drum, toward the hard drives. He would not have them. I lunged, grabbing the drives. I looked around, frantic. Not the water. I wouldn't let them be lost. Nearby was a large, orange waterproof case, blown open by the explosion. A marine distress kit. I saw the flare launcher, a wide-barreled orange pistol, and the cylindrical red flares beside it. An idea, insane and brilliant, lit up my mind. I didn't grab a flare. I shoved the hard drives, both of them, into the wide-mouthed barrel, ramming them down with my fist. They barely fit. I grabbed a flare, jammed it in behind them, and clicked the launcher shut. "Harper, no!" Silas screamed, seeing me. He shoved Ronan off him, a desperate, powerful move, and scrambled toward me. He was too late. I didn't aim at the sky. I aimed at the clouds. I aimed at the city. I pulled the trigger. Whoosh! A deafening roar. The launcher kicked in my hand, slamming my shoulder. A comet of burning red magnesium shot into the night sky, a screaming, ascending star. It wasn't just light, it was data. The flare reached its apex, 1,000 feet above the city, and exploded, a massive crimson starburst that lit the world. The hard drives, caught in the intense, immediate heat, began to vaporize. But for one spectacular, horrifying second, the storm clouds became a screen. The exploding data, fragmented by the blast, projected itself against the low-hanging clouds. It was a ghost image, a digital, fiery confession, spreadsheets, routing numbers, names, dollar amounts, the society's black ledger, the red Cypress payroll, all of it, written in fire, big enough for the whole city to see. Keely Frost, her 30-minute timer 1 second from ringing, was on the bridge, binoculars to her eyes, watching the pier. She, and every news helicopter that had been drawn by the fireworks, saw it, the truth, burning in the sky. The sky was painted red, a burning, digital confession smeared across the storm clouds. Below, on the drenched and splintering pier, the world had gone silent, save for the wind and the rain. Silas Creed, his face a mask of disbelief and fury, stared at the fiery data burning in the sky. He was broken. He lunged, not at me, but at Ronan, a last desperate act of spite, but his movements were clumsy, his rage making him sloppy. Ronan sidestepped, using Silas's own momentum to shove him hard toward the broken edge of the pier. Silas toppled, his feet slipping on the wet wood, and he fell. He managed to grab a thick, rusted anchor chain hanging from a piling, his body dangling over the black, churning water. He was disarmed, defeated, his army gone, his data scattered for the world to see. Ronan stood over him, his left forearm bleeding freely, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked down at the man who had tried to kill him, who had taken me. He could have kicked his hand. He could have walked away. Instead, Ronan Delacroix extended his right hand. "It's over, Silas," he said, his voice raw. "Take my hand. You'll face the law, but you won't die here." It was the ultimate choice, law over revenge, the hard, clean path his father never took. Silas stared at the offered hand, his chest heaving, his pale green eyes, full of swamp water and hate, looked up at Ronan. He saw the choice being made, and he rejected it. He smiled, a gurgling, wet sound. He gathered the fluid in his throat and spat, a thick wad of defiance that landed on Ronan's boot. "I'd rather hell," Silas hissed. And he let go. He didn't make a sound. He just released the chain, his body a dead weight, and the black, churning water of the Mississippi swallowed him whole. He was gone. Ronan stood there, his hand still extended in the empty, rain-filled air, a silent testament to the choice he had made. Then, the world exploded in blue and red light. Sirens, no longer distant, wailed from the docks. Footsteps, heavy, tactical, thundered onto the pier. Keely Frost was at the front of the pack, her gun raised, her face a mask of grim determination. She saw me, saw Ronan, his arm bleeding, his hand still outstretched over the black water where Silas had been. She saw everything. Her eyes darted from Ronan to me, to the sky where the data flare was finally fading. Her 30 minutes were up. She strode forward, her gaze locked on Ronan. "Ronan Delacroix," she said, her voice hard, but the triumphant edge was gone. She pulled a set of zip-tie cuffs from her belt. She looked at his bleeding arm. She looked at his empty, offered hand. She looked at me, alive and whole. She looked at the burned-out flare launcher at my feet. With a sharp sigh of frustration, she snapped the cuffs back onto her belt. "You're a federal fugitive, Delacroix," she said, her voice low, for his ears only. "Your monitor is dead. You violated our agreement." "He came for me," I said, my voice shaking. "He saved my life." "He saved his asset," Keely retorted, but her heart wasn't in it. She pointed at the sky. That changes the game, but it doesn't erase the board." She holstered her weapon. "You're not under arrest." Ronan looked at her, surprised. "You're under protective custody," she snapped. "Your little stunt just made you the #1 target for every last member of the society you just exposed. You're coming with me, not in a cage, but you are not walking away. We're done with monitors." She met his gaze, a new, grudging respect in her eyes. "We're moving to supervised cooperation. You'll talk. You'll tell us everything that wasn't in that light show. And we'll see." In a sterile, white room 2 days later, Etienne March, pale and trembling, signed his confession. He was offered a deal by Keeley's superiors, a deal brokered on the back of Ronan's cooperation. He took it. He detailed the entire Red Cypress network, a map of poison that spiderwebbed across 3 states. His testimony, combined with the data I'd projected, was enough to launch a dozen federal investigations. He would serve time, but his one condition was met. His daughter, Elodie, was given a new name, a new identity, and a trust fund, quietly established by the Refine NOLA Foundation, to ensure she would never be touched by her father's sins. Ronan's war was over. His transformation began. He didn't just cooperate, he divested. He moved 60% of his personal assets, a staggering sum, permanently into the Refine NOLA Foundation. But it wasn't just about art anymore. He launched a new initiative, Harbor Hands. It was a program designed to fund trade certifications and offer clean, high-paying jobs to the dock workers and cargo haulers, the very people Silas had preyed on, giving them a way out of the web before they were ever caught in it. He was systematically, brick by brick, dismantling his own dark legacy, pulling himself away from the society, not by fighting it, but by making it obsolete, one clean dollar at a time. I found my own way. I didn't want the Bywater studio. It was his fortress. I wanted a home. I went back to the Bayou Bite. The diner was closed, seized as part of Mac's criminal assets. I bought it, with a check from Ronan that he didn't call a loan, but an investment. I tore out the greasy fryers. I tore out the cracked red vinyl booths. I kept only the shell, the good bones, the windows that looked out over the river. We refinished the old wooden floors, sanded them down until they were pale and clean. I opened it as a studio, a free community art school, a place for the kids from the Treme School, for anyone who needed a safe place to create. And on the main wall, where the bar used to be, I hung my first and only painting. It was a massive canvas, an abstract, a chaotic, beautiful explosion of crimson, white and gold against a storm-black background. It was made from the dozens of still frames my mind had captured from the data flare, the digital ghosts of the ledger. I called it Heartbeat in the Rain. One night, a month later, I was there late, cleaning brushes. The studio was quiet, smelling of turpentine and linseed oil. The city lights glittered on the river. Ronan walked in, and he wore no jacket, just a simple black shirt, his arm in a sling. The ankle monitor was long gone. He looked lighter. He didn't speak. He just held out his good hand. I took it. There was no music, just the sound of the city, the distant moan of a saxophone from the street. He pulled me close, and we danced, a slow, simple box step on the clean, dry wooden floor. His forehead rested against mine. His breathing was slow, even, my hands stained with paint, clasped behind his neck. It wasn't the fiery, desperate passion of the storm. It was better. It was the deep, quiet warmth of the harbor. It was the feeling of 2 people who had survived the same shipwreck, finally standing on dry land. He kissed me, a deep, slow kiss that held no desperation, only promise. It was a long, quiet sigh. "This beat," he whispered against my mouth, his voice a low vibration, "is ours." Keeley visited the studio a year later. She looked different. Her hair was down. She wore a simple blouse, not a pantsuit. She looked at the kids' paintings on the wall, at my heartbeat, and nodded, impressed. She placed a single, thin manila file on my desk. "1 year," she said. "You've both kept your word. The Red Cypress network is gone. The port is the cleanest it's been in 50 years. Ronan walked out from the back office, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He placed one in front of her. He wasn't surprised to see her. "The commission reviews your case next month," Keeley told him, sipping the coffee. "Given your testimony and this," she motioned to the studio, "they're recommending a full expungement, if you keep your word." Ronan looked around the room, at the art, at me. He nodded. "I've chosen a different legacy. Agent Frost." Keely, she corrected, and for the first time she smiled. On the wall, by the entrance, I had hung one last piece. It was a small, black shadow box. Inside, mounted on a piece of white linen, was the heavy, black onyx fleur-de-lis ring, the one he had worn, the one that had started it all. He had given it to me the day his file was closed, a symbol of the past, finally tamed, finally caged, a memory, not a master. The next autumn, the Trema was alive with a fall festival. The air was crisp, and the music from a half-dozen brass bands was a joyful, chaotic symphony. Children ran laughing, their faces painted. I was sitting in a booth. The booth, I'd saved one. Booth 4. It was in the back of my studio, by the window, a quiet place to read. Ronan slid in across from me, handing me a paper cone of hot beignets, dusting my nose with powdered sugar. I laughed, and he smiled, a real smile, one that reached his dark river eyes and transformed his face. On the table between us, a small, polished brass plaque was affixed to the wall, just below the window. It read, "Booth reserved for those who need shelter from the storm. Please sit." The camera pulls back, out the window, high above the studio, high above the river, high above the glittering, impossible healing city of New Orleans, a city and a love like a mangrove tree born in salt water, strong enough to withstand the hurricane, its roots tangled in the mud, but always, always, growing toward the light. Thank you so much for listening to our story. Where in the world are you listening from? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to connect and share our thoughts. Please subscribe to our channel, Mafia Boss Stories, and like this video. If you enjoyed it, please support us by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.